Gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. A massive development from the Supreme Court today. We are winning. We have won massively. President Trump has won. The Republicans have won. Common sense has won. Wow, I'm actually very happy. Typically when I talk about the Supreme Court, I'm complaining about something. Their lack of doing something, their inability to hold anyone accountable and uphold the Constitution the way I see it. But today, it's a complete win, an election integrity win that does transform elections in the country. And it really rips apart the Democrats' election fraud apparatus, their mail-in ballot cheating schemes. Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Sniffer, they're going to be pissed about this because the midterms are their biggest bet. They are trying to stop the Trump agenda by electing Democrats in the midterm. Not electing, cheating, rigging the election for Democrats. So what am I talking about? Well, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that candidates, so anyone running for office, have inherent standing to sue in federal court over election rules. Let me play this video from Tom Fighton. This guy is huge, man. I met him in person. He's big, man. Those muscles on him. He has been all over election integrity, pushing for it, forcing states to drop their, hundreds of thousands, millions of fake names on their voter rolls through Judicial Watch. Yeah, Fighton is amazing, but here's his video explaining this case, which SCOTUS just ruled upon.
Everyone, the Supreme Court just announced today would take up an election law related challenge filed by Judicial Watch in Illinois on behalf of a congressman and electors in Illinois concerned about the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day, which they do for 2 weeks after Election Day in Illinois. That means ballots arrive up to 2 weeks past Election Day and they still get counted, which is contrary to federal law, which states an election day, not an election week. Now, the congressman, federal candidate, obviously has standing to challenge such a law, but the two lower courts decided no, he doesn't have standing. They were divided, but the Supreme Court wants to settle this issue, and they decided to take up this massive Judicial Watch case. It's historically important that the rule of law be vindicated on election integrity. So this is a big step, and the court will hear our case next term.
And here they did, and ruled in your favor they also did. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, it was a dispute, actually. It was an argument in this country over whether or not candidates who were on the ballot had standing to sue to challenge the validity of ballots, of the results. That's bizarre, right? I know. What does standing mean? Well, standing effectively means if you get slapped in the face and you go to court, your standing is you got hurt, you got slapped, so you suffered an injury. So you have a reason, you have just cause to come before the court to settle the dispute. That's standing. So if someone screws you over in a business dealing and you sue them in court, you have standing. But if you were just a bystander and didn't get slapped in the face and didn't get screwed over in the business dealing and you try to sue, then you don't have standing. The case would be dismissed for lack of standing. So standing is very simple. It's legalese for did you get hurt? Did you suffer harm of any kind? And so now with the explanation, doesn't it sound bizarre that candidates who get on the ballot, campaign, do all the work, and then have an election rigged against them were told they didn't have standing by multiple federal courts after the 2020 election, the sham that was? So many candidates sued, including the president, Donald Trump, sued in court alleging all kinds of election manipulation or whatever. And many courts said, you don't have standing. So a lot of the cases were dismissed on procedural grounds. Standing is a procedural hurdle. They were not heard on the merits. So large majority of the cases the Democrats constantly cite when it comes to elections and the 2020 election. Trump filed so many lawsuits and they all got dismissed. A large chunk of those cases were dismissed on standing, not with oral merit-based arguments heard. So that's all square now, ladies and gentlemen, with this ruling. What SCOTUS is effectively doing is saying, if you are a candidate, a Republican, a Democrat even, and you have your election rigged against you, you can now sue and no court will dismiss your case. The implication of this is obviously that it makes it harder to cheat and get away with it. You can't cheat now as easily because candidates will sue. So I guess this Congressman Michael Bost and two other political candidates filing this lawsuit, that counting ballots received after Election Day violates federal law. That was the premise of their lawsuit. They said, look at federal law. It says we have an election day. We don't have an election month, right? We have federal law that mandates that we have elections on the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Every 4 years for the presidency, every 2 years for members of Congress, and every 6 years for members of the Senate. So federal law makes it clear that election day is one day. It's a day, not a week, not a month, not a year. Well, we have election year, but it's the season that the election is held in. It's, the annual day for the election. We get ready for this election year. But it doesn't mean ballots can show up days after the fact and then get counted as though they were legal ballots. So that was the premise of the lawsuit. They said these ballots should not be counted if they are received after Election Day. They principally contended that doing so conflicts with 2 U.S.C. Section 7 and 3 U.S.C. Section 1, which set Election Day as the Tuesday following the first Monday in November. The district court dismissed the case on standing, and the Seventh Circuit affirmed on the ground that petitioners lacked standing. So, held as a candidate for office, Congressman Bost has standing to challenge the rules that govern the counting of votes in his election. So that is the ruling of the Supreme Court. Under Article 3 of the Constitution, plaintiffs must have a personal stake in a case to have standing to sue. An unlawful election rule can injure a candidate in several ways. It might cause him to lose the election, require him to expend additional resources, or decrease his vote share, and damage his reputation. But winning and doing so as inexpensively and decisively as possible are not a candidate's only interest in an election, saying candidates have other interest other than just winning. They can lose, and that loss could be illegal. Unlawful election rules can cause real damage. Candidates also have an interest in a fair process. Candidates seek to represent the people, and their interest in that prize cannot be severed from their interest in the electoral process. Win or lose, candidates suffer when the process departs from the law. The harm to candidates from an unfair and inaccurate election is not common to all. While voters also have a general interest in an accurate vote tally, a candidate's interest differs in kind. Those who spend time and resources seeking to claim the right to vote, to voice the will of the people, have an undeniably different and more particularized interest in knowing what that will is. Rules that undermine the integrity of the electoral process also determine the winner's political legitimacy. The counting of unlawful votes or discarding of lawful ones erodes public confidence in election results and the elected representative. And they are particularly concrete for those whose very jobs depend on the support of the people. Candidates do not need to show a substantial risk that a rule will cause them to lose the election or prevent them from achieving a legally significant vote threshold in order to have standing. requiring such a showing could channel many election disputes to shortly before Election Day or after. Only then will many candidates be able to predict with any certainty that a rule will be outcome determinative. Yet the court has repeatedly emphasized that lower federal courts should ordinarily not alter the election rules on the eve of an election. Such late-breaking, court-ordered rule changes can result in voter confusion and undermine confidence in the integrity of the electoral process. The democratic consequences can be worse if courts intervene only after votes have been counted. Counting first and ruling upon legality afterwards is not a recipe for producing election results that have the public acceptance democratic stability requires. I love this. I love it. Premising standing on a candidate's risk of election loss or failure to achieve a certain vote threshold would also convert Article 3 judges into political prognosticators and invite findings on matters as to which neither judges nor anyone else can have any confidence. So, nor would requiring candidates to plead a substantial risk of harm to their vote leave courts on any surer footing. Okay. So, I love rulings like this. So, Chief Justice John Roberts delivered the opinion in which Alito, Justice Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, joined by Amy Coney Barrett, and Elena Kagan, of all people, joined the Republicans. That's why, well, not the Republicans, the conservative judges. That's why it's a 7-2 decision. Of course, Keninja Brown Jackson and Sotomayor, they dissented. Because they, for whatever reason, think votes that show up weeks after the election should count. That's disgraceful. We have three, all the liberal ones, on the Supreme Court that are totally okay with elections happening in seasons and not days. Mail-in ballots for years. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is big. Big for a variety of reasons. If a cheat occurs, candidates don't have to spend all kinds of money with lawyers arguing on standing. They go straight to merits. No courts, left or right, will be able to dismiss cases. And procedural dismissals is really how they get away with the fraud. Because if every case was heard on the merits after the 2020 election, even before the 2020 election when they challenged the rules with the drop boxes and other things, then Democrats would have been cornered. Even Democrat-appointed judges wouldn't have had a choice but to seriously weigh the truthfulness of the 2020 election. The evidence was outstanding. So this forces the lower courts to no longer dismiss cases, especially ones filed by candidates. The court also, in another, without really super saying it, they also established that voters have an interest, but they're saying that candidates have an even larger interest. So this is an indirect way of saying the people that participate in the election as voters or candidates have standing to sue and challenge rules beforehand and after. That's what I like. That's what I think is important. So this is transformational. We won't get the dismissals we've been getting. This makes fraud harder. Plus, you have a DOJ that is controlled by the Trump administration, and they're going to have monitors in all 50 states in November. Things will be caught if they happen. Very happy about this. This is the vindication we've been waiting for. But I wish the Supreme Court made this decision in 2020. But, better now than never. So 2026, I expect a decreased mail-in voting activity. So that should probably favor Republicans. This is probably the first midterm in a while that the ruling party has a legitimate chance of holding power, usually the opposition just takes Congress, the House, rarely the Senate. This is the first time in a while Republicans have a serious chance at winning. And remember, most of the times it goes as follows. On election night, votes are getting counted. The Republican candidate is leading by a lot. And then mail-in votes start getting counted, and that lead shrinks. And you would think, like how Florida does, at midnight they'll be done counting and declare a winner. But no, they start to receive mail-in ballots. They start to find ballots, literally. Find ballots from Imaginaryville County. And those ballots come from people that have been deceased for hundreds of years probably, right? The disciples of Jesus Christ are amongst the voters. Jesus would have voted, but he resurrected, so unfortunately he's not qualified to be a Democrat voter. That's how it works. And then those votes that come in over time, over weeks after the election, start to dilute and reduce the Republicans' victory margin. And all of a sudden, the Democrat wins by just a little bit over 500 votes or something, like just enough to make it look like, okay, almost 1,000 people voted. So that's how the operation works. But if you cut off everything on election night, they don't have time to come up with shenanigans because they have to get the votes done, get it counted, and maintain chain of custody. The next thing that needs to happen is proof of citizenship to register to vote. That's it. Anyone that's registering to vote needs to bring proof of citizenship, anything that proves citizenship. Because, again, that forces chain of custody. Because if every vote needs to be from a legal citizen, then there must be proof that every vote was indeed from a legal citizen. That's why you have laws like that. People say, yeah, but we already have so many laws. We just need to enforce the ones on the books. Yeah, but we're dealing with people that cheat in very creative ways. The drop boxes, the mail-in ballots to nursing homes. So that's who we're dealing with. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the news. Great work from the Supreme Court. I'm very happy with this development. This is amazing. All right. Lord, I thank you for what SCOTUS did. Keep blessing them, giving them wisdom. Motivate them to keep these kinds of decisions coming. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, because I don't want to hear about tariffs overturned. There's a decent chance they do it because Trump had like 5 other laws. Why did they do it like this? He had like 5 other laws that allowed him to impose tariffs, and he used the Economic Emergency Powers Act, which is very unclear what the president's authority with tariffs actually is. He should have used the other laws. Man, because it will look embarrassing if he actually gets those overturned. But, that's a topic for tomorrow, right? We'll let tomorrow worry about itself, but they postponed that ruling. All right. Goodbye. By the way, if you haven't paid your rent by hitting the like button, I have problems with you. Hit the like button, please. Pay your rent around this channel by hitting the like button. Can't be out here living on rent-stabilized videos.